Good morning. All right, I know that the excerpt of Book 9 of the Odyssey was a little long this week, but hopefully you found it exciting and interesting. We are going to be analyzing Book 9 in this video. This will also go along with the guided notes that I am attaching, so please take a look at that. You can print it yourself, of course, or you can take your own notes and make it your own and be creative. So the first thing we have to kind of do before we analyze Book 9 is keep track of our timeline. So in Book 9, Odysseus has just escaped Calypso and was hiding in the bushes, if you recall. And now he was found, and King Alcinous has invited Odysseus to his palace. So Odysseus is now attending a big dinner or a banquet with King Alcinous, and King Alcinous asks Odysseus to tell him the story of how he came to be hiding in those bushes all by himself in a foreign land. So Odysseus is like, oh, let me tell you the story. And he begins by saying, I am Odysseus, Laertes' son. So in the very beginning of Book 9, Odysseus introduces himself, and there is a really important characteristic in the characterization of Odysseus. We have to know what motivates him. So if you look at lines 24 through 26, Odysseus explicitly states what's really important to him, and that's going to be very important to us as students and of English who are learning the Odyssey. So I'll read it to you now. It says, where shall a man find sweetness to surpass his own home and his parents? So Odysseus's prize is, above all else, his home and his traditions and his family. So that's what motivates Odysseus and what keeps him kind of going. So then he starts out with his victory at Troy. So no amazing conquering hero can go without bragging about their military might. And Odysseus is a commander, and his idea made his side win, so saved the war. And they conquered Troy. So Odysseus tells Alcinous that he was in the Battle of Troy and that they won because of his idea. And then he says, on the way home, we raided enemy villages. Now, before we think, oh, that jerk Odysseus, he's raiding these towns, how terrible. You have to understand that there's hundreds of men on these boats back in the day, and Odysseus is in charge of their welfare, and they have to have enough food and water and supplies, and also they don't get paid the way you do now. If you join the military, they don't get paid. So what you kind of take for yourself is what you've earned, and you have to be able to support your family back home. So they have to have kind of things to show for being away for so long. I think they were away fighting the Trojan War for like 8 years. So a long time. They need money and supplies to bring back home to make that worth it. So they specifically only target enemy towns that were allies of Troy, their enemy that they beat. So it kind of makes them feel justified in raiding these territories because they did win that war, and Troy no longer is a kingdom. It no longer stands. So they raid these towns and villages. They take cattle and sheep and supplies and monies and all this stuff, but they don't take slaves. After they've raided these places so that they have the things they need to be able to survive the trip home, they actually land on an island, and Odysseus calls it the island of the Lotus Eaters. Now this is very interesting in our analysis because things like this have happened again and again in history. So the drug that comes to mind is opium. So the Opium Wars was when opium was exported out of China, and countries would on purpose spread opium around for cheap price or for free because it made people really docile and kind of obedient. And so they were like, yes, let's give everyone opium and we can conquer all these countries and take over. So the Opium Wars were pretty intense. Now, the Lotus Eaters in the Odyssey kind of mimic that. So Odysseus lands on this island, and the people there eat lotuses. So eat lotus eaters, obviously. And he sends some men out, oh, go see what these people are about. And they don't come back because they ate the lotuses. And they're like, we're so happy here, leave us. And Odysseus is like, no. So he takes his men back and he ties them up and drags them against their will and puts them on the ship, and he tells the rest of his men, don't eat the lotuses or you will never come home because you won't have the will. So Odysseus is clearly a leader in this story. Now this leads up to the Cyclops. So we read the story together. So I read the story to you, or you read it by yourself. So there's two things I want to kind of bring to your attention, and these are qualities of Odysseus that maybe today I was kind of like side-eyeing him, like, dude, chill out. So, but back in the time that the Odyssey was written, these qualities were considered heroic or masculine or manly or powerful, whereas today we might think he's a little extra or even a little stupid, although we know he's not. Odysseus is a very, very intelligent and creative and manipulative and strategic man. So, as we see in the Cyclops. So, the two things that stood out to me as kind of like, really? Odysseus kind of lands on this island and it's abandoned, but he can see across the way from the island he's on another land. And it's not an island, it's like a continent. And he's like, I want to go see who lives there because he's an adventurer and he's full of curiosities. And he feels protected by the god's law. This is very important, so make note of that. At these times that Odysseus was living in, there's this religious law mandated by Zeus, the king of all the gods, that you have to be hospitable or kind to guests or be punished. So courtesy to guests in your own home is not just like something you can do if you want to. It's a religious mandate. So you have to be kind to guests in your home. So Odysseus feels protected by this. So he's like, I'm going to go see what these people are like. Are they beasts or good people? And it's actually a land of Cyclopses, who are sons of Poseidon, the children of Poseidon. And they're not human. They're really huge, very massive, one eye in their face, obviously, the Cyclops. And they're kind of dumb and brutish. Now, Odysseus dislikes them immensely because they have no society and they're not civilized and they have no manners. And Odysseus is like, oh, you guys are horrible things. But he still feels protected by this law. Now, he finds a cave of one particular Cyclops who becomes his enemy. Now, this is where I'm like, so his men are like, let's take the things we need, the sheep and the pelts, and just get out of here. And Odysseus explicitly states in the story, so if you're printing these excerpts, you might want to mark it or highlight it. Odysseus explicitly states he knows that this is a good idea, that his men are correct, that it is the wiser course to take these things and run. But he still wants to meet a Cyclops in person, and he still feels protected by this law, so he decides to stay. So Odysseus stays to meet the Cyclops, and we know from reading the excerpt that this was a bad idea. The Cyclops brutally kills, and eats in front of them 4 of his crew, his mates, his friends. And this really, really upsets Odysseus, which might make sense later why he does the second thing that makes me go, really? So once Odysseus does get free, I'm not going to go into details because we already read it. Hopefully you read it or listened to me read it to you. He gets free from the Cyclops, and as he's escaping, he decides to taunt the Cyclops. So he's like, yo, look what I did to you. You thought you were so big and bad. Well, I just took out your eye. I'm Odysseus, Laertes' son. And because he's shouting across the water, the blind Cyclops now kind of knows which direction he's in. So he tosses this enormous boulder, and it almost shipwrecks him. He almost gets pushed back on the island, which would mean his death. The Cyclops is not happy. So um, Odysseus, uses his strength and gets his men to like row hard enough that they don't get shipwrecked. And he yells out again. So he taunts the Cyclops a second time and shouts out some more things at the Cyclops, saying, I hope you never get healed. If I could, I would kill you and send you to hell, and like really horrible things. And so the Cyclops is enraged and actually tosses the top of a hilltop at his boat, but they are just far enough out of reach that it hits behind them and it pushes them towards the island that the rest of his men are waiting on, towards freedom, towards escape. So he lucked out there. So staying when he knew it was a bad idea and then taunting the Cyclops after he does manage to escape both seem to me like arrogant moves, very boastful, cocky, but a hero back in those days would have been those things. He's fearless. Odysseus isn't afraid of the Cyclops, and he won the battle against the Cyclops through his smarts, by tricking him, and also by his physical strength. So he doesn't feel like he should have to whisper or like sneak away. So he's like banging on his chest and being like, boom, there. So I'm interested to hear in the live lessons what you think about Odysseus. Do you think this makes him more a hero in your eyes in today's standards, making these brave, reckless choices? Or do you think he's kind of being stupid or ridiculous or not heroic by boasting and not listening to his instincts and his men and staying in the first place? It got 4 of his men killed, so it's tough to be them. Now, the second thing I want to point out in this analysis from the Cyclops adventure is the gods. So hopefully the gods' intervention. So hopefully you are making a T-chart that kind of shows on one side of the T-chart a list of the times the gods have helped Odysseus, and then on the other side of the T-chart a list of times that the gods were against Odysseus. So Odysseus kind of prays to Athena when he's trapped in the Cyclops cave, because the Cyclops blocked it with this massive rock that humans cannot move. So he prays to Athena, and some good luck happens. So the first good luck thing that happens is, instead of leaving the male sheep outside the cave, the Cyclops for some reason has this urge and brings all the sheep into the cave. And if he hadn't done this, they couldn't have tied themselves to the sheep and escape out the door in the morning when the Cyclops lets the sheep out. So the gods are clearly on Odysseus' side in that way. And we are kind of led to believe that Zeus plays a part in this too, because the Cyclops does break courtesy with his guests and abuses them instead of acknowledging that he has an obligation to his guests to treat them well. And the Cyclops even boasts about not being scared of Zeus, and he's the son of Poseidon, and he's strong enough. Zeus has nothing on him. So this could be kind of like karma, or the gods intervening because of that boast for Odysseus' favor. Now, once Odysseus escapes and is on the boat and taunting the Cyclops, the gods kind of turn away from Odysseus at that point, because the Cyclops prays to Poseidon, his father, to like revenge him, get revenge for what happened to him and what Odysseus does to him. And so the Cyclops explicitly says, may you never get back home for many years, and when you do, I hope it's full of strife and bad things happen to you, and that every one of your crewmates and your mates perishes, so that you're the only one who lives. And this actually comes true. The gods hear his prayer, so they favor the Cyclops now instead of Odysseus. But we don't know that yet. All of this happens before Calypso, because remember, Odysseus is at the banquet with King Alcinous, and he's telling him the story of what happened to him after he left Troy. So we do know that when he's with Calypso, it is just him. He doesn't have his men. So somewhere between the Cyclops and Calypso, all of his men perish. So we'll learn about how that happens later. And this is partly because of the Cyclops' curse. Poseidon, Odysseus just attacked and then taunted his Poseidon's son, a Cyclops. So he gets punished for that. If you look at the board that I wrote for you guys, it kind of summarizes. If you want to write this down, I'll leave it on the screen for a few minutes, or you can just pause the YouTube video. So, Book 9, New Kos and Poseidon's son. So the timeline, I put it up here. This is chronological. This is before Calypso, before the banquet with King Alcinous. Odysseus is telling that king the story of his adventures since Troy. So the first thing we know from the timeline that Odysseus tells King Alcinous is that he wins the Trojan War, then he raids enemy towns on the way home for supplies, and this is not him being a bad guy. It's necessary for his men's survival for the voyage home, but it's still kind of a jerk move if you ask me. But he really has no choice, and it is expected of him. Then he meets the Lotus Eaters, who are using lotuses as a drug to kind of like be chill, and Odysseus almost loses men to the lotus. They want to stay and eat the lotuses, but he ties them up and drags them to the ship. Then he meets the Cyclops, which is the majority of the excerpt from Book 9, the story of the Cyclops. And it's really significant because that's where the curse comes into play. The Cyclops prays to Poseidon and curses Odysseus' journey home. Now, questionable actions for a hero by today's standards. He stays in the Cyclops cave purposefully to meet the Cyclops, even though he has a feeling that it's a bad idea. He still trusts in the courtesy that the gods demand hosts give guests, and he's just a curious, brave guy. And then after he does manage to escape through his wits and his intelligence, he tricks the Cyclops several times, and then he physically overpowers him by driving a red-hot stake through his eye, blinding the Cyclops. So after he manages all this and escapes this man-eating Cyclops, he taunts the enemy twice, almost getting his ship capsized the first time. His crewmates beg him to stop taunting the Cyclops, and he does it again a second time. He doesn't listen to his crewmates. He's the boss. He's the leader. He's brave. His crewmates aren't quite as brave as Odysseus. So that's like kind of the main ideas, key ideas of the excerpt of Book 9. And if you notice in the PDF version of the excerpt, the file I put on OSS Connect, in the margin of the story, there are like little notes. Those are really important. Any of those that are in the margin could be on the Odyssey exam that we will take at the end of reading the Odyssey. So make sure you guys are taking notes, open book, open note. You know how my tests are. The internet won't exactly help you. I don't tend to ask things like, what color was his shirt? It's more about the main ideas and concepts and understanding them and being able to apply them. So that all has to come from you. So take note of those notes in the margin. Take notes of my key ideas and details. On the guided notes, you're going to see really long list of vocabulary, characters, and places. You do not have to fill in the definitions of all of them. Those are just kind of, if you don't know any of those words or if any of them stand out to you and you want to like look up the definitions, these are words you are going to see on FSAs and SATs, and as students of the English language, you should kind of be aware of these words. And in the course of the story, you should be aware of the characters that are involved, the history behind it, and the places. So if you want to do a few of them that you choose, you can. More importantly is the key ideas and details and the summary. So you do have to do the summary and the key ideas and details if you want those good notes and those good points. All right, you guys, a long excerpt, a long analysis. Next week it won't quite be so long, but we got through the Cyclops. Bye guys, see you next week.